They roamed the planet for longer than modern man. Neanderthals.
Neanderthals were superb survivors.
But then suddenly they vanished.
For centuries, no one could explain why the Neanderthals vanished. They were strong, intelligent, and built to survive the Ice Age. Yet 40,000 years ago, they disappeared without a trace. Archaeologists searched their caves and studied their bones, but the answer never came.
Recent archaeological finds in England and France have helped researchers find out more about these early inhabitants of Eurasia.
Then DNA technology exposed what the Earth had been hiding, and the truth rewrote everything we thought we knew about their extinction. The quietest extinction. For more than 300,000 years, the Neanderthals thrived across Europe and Western Asia. They hunted mammoths and bison, built shelters from stone and animal hides, and endured temperatures that would freeze most humans today. Evidence suggests they cared for the sick and elderly. Their species lasted far longer than ours has so far, adapting through countless ice ages and natural disasters. Then, around 40,000 years ago, they disappeared. Traces of their lives remain across continents, but each discovery ends the same way, in silence. From Spain to Siberia, archaeologists have found the remains of their daily lives, fire pits filled with ash, stone blades shaped with care, and footprints of children hardened in ancient mud. In some caves, they found bodies placed in shallow graves and dusted with pigment, evidence that Neanderthals might have understood death and memory. These finds revealed that they were not primitive beings hiding in caves, but human-like people with emotion and intelligence. Still, every site tells the same story. The fires went out, the tools were abandoned, the people were gone. The puzzle has frustrated generations of researchers. According to several reports, early archaeologists called the search a hunt for ghosts. They saw Neanderthals as a vanished version of ourselves, people who shared nearly everything with us, from brain size to hand structure, yet somehow failed to survive the final stretch of prehistory. It felt personal, as if humanity had lost a branch of its own family tree and could not explain how or why. Even today, some researchers describe an eerie silence when they enter a Neanderthal cave, as though the people who lived there had simply stepped out and never came back. As excavations expanded, the same strange pattern kept appearing. Settlements across Europe, the Middle East, and Central Asia ended abruptly. There was no single disaster, no signs of war or mass death. Instead, their presence faded gradually from the record. Archaeologists began calling it the quietest extinction on Earth. The mystery soon moved beyond bones and artifacts. It became a deeper question about endurance itself. How could a species so strong and adaptive disappear so completely? The evidence in the ground ended without explaining the cause. With no clear answers, scientists had to rely on reasoning and guesswork. They started forming theories based on the few traces they had, trying to make sense of the silence the bones had left behind. The theories that lied. When the first Neanderthal bones were unearthed in the mid-1800s, they threw the scientific world into chaos. The skulls looked human but heavier, the limbs shorter and the bones thicker. Some scholars called them brutish savages, while others saw them as evidence of a forgotten race wiped from existence. With no technology to analyze what they had found, people did what humans often do when faced with the unknown. They guessed. Every field, from science to religion, tried to fill the silence left by the fossils with its own story. The first and most common theory blamed nature. Many scientists argued that the Ice Age was simply too harsh for Neanderthals to survive. They imagined freezing winds, moving glaciers, and empty hunting grounds wiping them out. It sounded convincing, and for decades, textbooks described them as victims of a world that had become too cold to live in. But later research began to challenge that idea. Excavation showed that Neanderthals had survived even colder periods before. Inside their caves, scientists found clear evidence of fire pits, burned animal bones, and tools used for butchering meat. These discoveries proved that they could hunt, make fire, and endure long winters. The cold alone could not have destroyed them. By the late 19th century, a more violent story took hold. Some researchers began to argue that early modern humans, Homo sapiens, had exterminated the Neanderthals. It was an idea that mirrored the mindset of the era, a tale of superiority and conquest that echoed the colonial worldview. The advanced species had supposedly destroyed the primitive one. one. It made sense to the public, but the evidence refused to cooperate. Excavations revealed no mass graves, no battle wounds, and no signs of widespread violence. In some regions, the two species even seemed to have lived side by side for generations. The extermination theory faded, but not before shaping public imagination for nearly a century. Religion and folklore also entered the debate. Some church historians in Europe claimed that the Neanderthals were an early branch of humanity wiped away by the biblical flood. Others speculated that they were descendants of Cain, cursed and destroyed for defying divine law. In Spain, local legends spoke of the children of the mist, ancient giants who were buried alive by angry gods after stealing fire from the heavens. In the Caucasus Mountains, villagers told stories about wild, hairy people who lived in caves and vanished after offending the forest spirits. Later ethnographic reports suggested that these myths might have been folk memories of real encounters with Neanderthals thousands of years earlier. The 20th century brought a more academic form of speculation. Anthropologists proposed that Neanderthals had failed because they were less intelligent or less social than humans. Some claimed they could not speak, while others said they lacked the creativity or adaptability to form large groups. But every time a new site was excavated, these assumptions fell apart. Researchers discovered pigments, carvings, and jewelry. These findings proved that Neanderthals were capable of language, art, and planning, qualities once thought unique to us. By the 1970s, the list of explanations had grown long, but none truly fit. Climate, war, divine punishment, and inferiority, every idea solved one piece of the puzzle and left another untouched. Their disappearance had been too widespread, too synchronized, and too clean to fit any single story. Frustration grew among scientists who had run out of answers. The bones had revealed how Neanderthals lived, but not why they were gone. After a century of speculation, one realization began to take hold. Guesswork had reached its limit. The truth would not come from myths, opinions, or comparisons. It was buried deeper than any excavation could reach, hidden within the fossils themselves, waiting for a kind of evidence that no one in the 19th or early 20th century could yet imagine. The bones that wouldn't speak. For more than a century, Neanderthal bones sat inside museum drawers, neatly labeled but silent. Researchers had mapped their skulls, measured their tools, and even reconstructed their faces. Yet all those efforts led to the same conclusion: the biggest secrets were locked inside the bones themselves. According to early reports, many scientists suspected that the answer to their disappearance was hidden at the molecular level, but the tools to uncover it simply did not exist. In the 1980s, a few daring geneticists tried to break that barrier. They attempted to extract DNA from the ancient fossils, hoping that chemical traces of Neanderthal life still lingered within. Every attempt failed. The samples were too degraded and too contaminated. Modern human DNA from the scientists' own skin or breath mixed with the samples, overpowering the fragile traces they were trying to isolate. By the time the results came back, there was no way to tell which fragments were Neanderthal and which were modern. Some laboratories stopped trying altogether, calling it a hopeless pursuit. The challenge went beyond contamination. Ancient DNA is fragile. It begins to decay soon after death, and heat, moisture, and bacteria speed up that process. By the time scientists examined the fossils, only a few microscopic fragments were left, and most of those belonged to microbes that had lived inside the bones for thousands of years. Less than 1% of what remained was authentic Neanderthal DNA. Even when small pieces were recovered, the sequencing machines of the time could not read them. They required long, complete strands, not the broken scraps that age had left behind. Frustration grew across the field. Many experts declared that ancient DNA could not survive more than 10,000 years. Some accused others of chasing fantasies. It seemed as though the molecular story of the Neanderthals would stay buried forever. But at the start of the 2000s, a small team in Germany refused to accept defeat. Under the leadership of Swedish scientist Svante Pääbo, the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology built a new kind of laboratory: the code beneath the dust. When scientists finally succeeded in extracting Neanderthal DNA, the achievement did not come easily or quickly. It was the result of years of work carried out inside one of the most sterile environments on Earth. In Leipzig, Germany, at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, Svante Pääbo and his team built laboratories sealed tighter than hospital wards. According to reports, every inch of the room was designed to block out modern contamination. The air was filtered, the walls were sterilized, and the scientists entered in full-body suits with masks and gloves. Even a single human hair could destroy a sample. The team treated each fragment of bone as if it were a priceless artifact, because in truth, it was. Inside this laboratory, the work followed a strict, delicate rhythm. Researchers carefully removed small pieces from Neanderthal fossils and ground them into fine powder. That powder was then mixed with enzymes that dissolved the minerals, releasing whatever traces of genetic material still survived inside. Every step had to be done with extreme caution. The goal was to isolate the few remaining strands of authentic Neanderthal DNA from the layers of bacterial and fungal DNA that had built up over thousands of years. Once the samples were purified, they were fed into high-throughput sequencing machines. These devices could read billions of short DNA fragments and convert them into digital data. Each fragment contained only a few letters of genetic code, but when combined, they formed a massive puzzle that had to be solved on a computer. At first, the raw files looked like complete disorder, millions of random sequences without any clear pattern. The challenge was not just collecting the data, but rebuilding the original genome from those broken pieces. To do this, scientists used advanced genome reconstruction software similar to programs like MegaHit and BWA-MEM, specially designed for ancient DNA analysis. These systems compared every fragment against reference genomes and looked for overlapping sequences, aligning them into their correct order. Unlike older tools that required long, clean strands of DNA, this new software could process billions of short, damaged fragments at once and identify where each piece belonged. It worked like a digital archaeologist, piecing together a shredded book that had been buried for 40,000 years. According to members of the research team, the first time the data began to form recognizable patterns, the laboratory fell completely silent. They were seeing something no human had ever seen before, a readable sequence of Neanderthal DNA. It was proof that genetic material could survive for tens of thousands of years if preserved in the right conditions. Over the next few months, the team refined the data, rechecked every letter, and compared it to modern human genomes. Then, in 2010, the moment arrived. On a glowing computer screen, the first full Neanderthal genome appeared, a complete map of their genetic code, written across billions of molecular letters. It was one of the greatest breakthroughs in the history of science. For the first time, humanity could read the biological record of another human species. When the data was compared to modern humans, researchers discovered traces of Neanderthal DNA inside living people. Nearly everyone outside Africa carried a small percentage of Neanderthal genes. It meant that somewhere in prehistory, humans and Neanderthals had met and reproduced. The discovery erased the old idea that one species had simply replaced the other. Instead, it proved that part of them had survived within us. The breakthrough changed the field. Scientists could finally read authentic Neanderthal DNA with precision and compare it to ours at scale. With the data cleaned and aligned, they began assembling the first complete picture from the fragments. And when they started piecing those pieces together, patterns emerged. Families in the stone. Once the genome data was complete, a new kind of information began to appear, not just about survival, but about relationships. From several caves where the bones were well preserved, scientists were able to compare DNA and identify which individuals were related to one another. They could tell who was part of the same family, who had come from a different region, and how people moved between small groups. This genetic map allowed them to estimate how many Neanderthals typically lived together and how their communities were formed. The clearest and most detailed results came from the Altai Mountains of Siberia, one of the coldest and most remote regions ever inhabited by Neanderthals. At a cave known as Chagirskaya, researchers sequenced DNA from several bones buried close to one another. What they found was extraordinary. The genetic data revealed an entire family group, a father, his teenage daughter, and their close relatives, uncles, cousins, and possibly even grandparents, all living together in one camp. It was the first time in human history that scientists could see the family structure of an extinct species written directly in its DNA. According to the research team, the findings confirmed that Neanderthals did not live as scattered loners, but as tight-knit communities bound by kinship. The study went further. Female DNA showed that women often came from different regions, suggesting that they moved between groups as part of mating exchanges. Males, on the other hand, tended to remain in their home territories for life. This pattern of mobility hinted at a social order designed to avoid inbreeding and maintain cooperation between neighboring camps. Population reconstructions based on the data indicated that a typical group rarely exceeded 50 individuals. Life was communal but small. Everyone likely knew everyone else, and survival depended on unity. Archaeological evidence supported this picture. Some burials contained ochre pigments and simple ornaments, which hinted at shared rituals and symbolic thought. These were not the mindless brutes once portrayed in old textbooks. They cared for their sick, buried their dead with care, and possibly believed in something beyond life. According to several reports, analysis of their teeth and bones revealed a diet that changed with the seasons, showing planning and cooperation in food gathering. The presence of young and elderly individuals in the same layers suggested that families stayed together until the end. This new understanding transformed the image of Neanderthals completely. They were no longer seen as primitive outcasts of evolution, but as social beings, humans with families, emotions, and culture. But behind that warmth, something darker was already at work. The DNA that revealed their compassion also carried traces of what would end them, secret hidden in their DNA. When the first complete Neanderthal genome appeared on laboratory screens, scientists expected answers about their biology, not their death. But as the data unfolded, it revealed something far heavier. The mystery of why Neanderthals vanished was not written in battle scars or burned villages. It was written in their DNA. The sequencing exposed something shocking. When scientists read the final Neanderthal genomes, they found long, repeated sections of identical DNA. In genetics, that is a clear warning sign. It meant that the same genes were being copied over and over again, proof that close relatives had been having children with one another for generations. The population had become too small for variation to survive. In the past, Neanderthals had lived in large, connected networks that stretched across thousands of miles. But toward the end, those connections collapsed. The species broke apart into small, isolated families, sometimes no more than 20 or 30 individuals living in caves separated by vast distances. With each generation, their gene pool shrank. Children inherited the same limited DNA again and again. Over time, that made them more vulnerable to illness, birth defects, and environmental change. The species was still breathing, but genetically it was running out of air. That fragility showed up everywhere the genomes were tested. In the Altai Mountains in Spain and across Western Asia, the pattern was the same. Neanderthal DNA from each site looked almost identical, as if the entire species had narrowed to a single thread. Geneticists from the Max Planck Institute described it as a collapse written in code. The Neanderthals were not wiped out by one event, they were slowly eroding from within. As the data grew, the story deepened. Between roughly 60,000 and 45,000 years ago, early humans began to move into Neanderthal territories. They met not as conquerors, but as neighbors. The DNA proved that they lived together and even formed families. For years, archaeologists had debated whether contact meant conflict. The genomes gave the first clear answer. It meant intimacy. But that intimacy carried a cost. Modern humans had larger populations and wider networks spreading across continents. Each contact between them and the smaller Neanderthal bands brought a flood of new genes into the human line, but almost none in return. The genetic exchange was one-sided. Humans absorbed fragments of Neanderthal DNA, yet the Neanderthals received almost nothing back. Without new genes to strengthen their diversity, their numbers stayed fragile while humans expanded. That imbalance was enough to tilt the future. Small populations cannot afford mistakes. A poor hunting season, a bad winter, or a few deaths in childbirth could destroy a lineage. The DNA revealed exactly that. Across multiple genomes, scientists found evidence of shrinking family trees, generations repeating the same inherited weaknesses, and entire groups disappearing without leaving descendants. In the simplest terms, the Neanderthals were running out of people. Then scientists found something even stranger. Inside Neanderthal DNA were fragments from ancient viruses, the genetic remains of old infections. The same viral traces appeared in early human DNA, suggesting that a pathogen had passed between both species. Some researchers believe that disease spread faster among the smaller Neanderthal groups, wiping out families that had no immunity while humans survived it. What emerged from the genetic evidence was not a story of war or weakness, but of slow suffocation, a biological trap that tightened over thousands of years. The Neanderthals endured longer than any human civilization has lasted, yet their world was built on fragile numbers. Every generation lost more genetic strength until there was nothing left to carry forward. By the time the last camps went silent, the Neanderthals were already part of us. Their DNA had merged with ours, living on as fragments in the modern human genome. It was both an ending and an inheritance, a record of a species that vanished through connection, not conflict. The final revelation was as tragic as it was humbling. Neanderthals did not die out because they were simple or weak. They vanished because they were few. Their downfall was not one event, but a slow genetic countdown that no one could stop. And in the end, the same DNA that ended them ensured that they would never be completely gone. The legacy in our cells. When the last small camps of Neanderthals disappeared from the map, their story did not end. Their DNA moved forward inside the growing human populations of Eurasia. Genetic surveys show that most people outside Africa carry a small share of Neanderthal ancestry, often between 1 and 2%. That fraction may seem minor, but it is active. It influences how our bodies respond to the world. Researchers have identified Neanderthal variants that help our skin and immune system recognize threats. Some studies report that these variants strengthen defenses against certain viruses. Other work links different Neanderthal segments to higher risk for allergies, blood clotting problems, or severe respiratory reactions. According to several geneticists, this mixed legacy fits the history we now see. Contact between the two species brought both useful defenses and hidden costs. The medical impact reaches into the present day. During recent viral outbreaks, teams compared patient genomes and found clusters of Neanderthal DNA among people with strong inflammatory responses. Some groups believe these patterns point to ancient immune settings that were once helpful in Ice Age environments but can overreact in modern settings. The same inheritance that protected our ancestors in cold valleys may contribute to dangerous inflammation in crowded cities. These are correlations, not final verdicts, but they show how the past still shapes our health. Which leaves a hard question for us now. If a human species as resilient as Neanderthals could be erased by contact and small numbers, what does that reveal about the fragility of our own future? Your turn. Should we treat this shared DNA mainly as a gift that helped humans adapt, or as a warning that the same connections that save us can also harm us? Tell me what you think in the comments, and share which part of the Neanderthal legacy you believe we should study first. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.